In the Church of Jesus Christ, we believe that God instituted marriage as a union between one man and one woman for a lifetime. Why do we believe that? One of our core beliefs is that marriage is intended to be a union between one man and one woman for life. There are a lot of different aspects of that statement that we could have conversations about, but today we're going to focus on the very end of that statement, for life, that God intended marriage to be for life. Just to start out, what is your guys' understanding of why God instituted marriage?
Well, we find, very early in the Bible, in the story of the creation, we, encounter Adam being created by God and being alone. And God's observation was that it's not good for man to be alone. That's a direct quote from Genesis. And he made a woman, and he brought her to the man, and Adam said, "Now this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. A man shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." So you can see, even in the concept, that they become one, not master slave, just one. So that was God's plan for man. It was good for man to have a partner.
Right. It's really something that, because God intended it to be for a lifetime, that we enter into that marriage bond seriously, sober-minded, prayerfully, seeking, God's direction and understanding, and to make sure that there's a compatibility, that you in fact do want to spend the rest of your life together. You want to enter a marriage with that intent, not with a attitude of, well, if this doesn't work out, I'll just go find something else.
What would you say to a person who's like, I understand God's plan, I understand this pattern he set up, however, I'm just not feeling happy in my marriage, I just feel like I'm not close to my spouse, or I don't feel like joy in thinking about spending my lifetime with this person, because they might be aware of God's intention or plan, but that doesn't necessarily change how they're feeling about the situation they might find themselves in.
Brother Jared, I think that's a great question. And I'm going to speak for myself, but I'm pretty sure that my brothers as well have had that same question posed to us by individuals who are married and who find themselves, as you said, not feeling joy, maybe not feeling that same love that they first felt when they, first entered into marriage. And it really reinforces the point of marriage takes work. It is not just we're going to be married today and it's a honeymoon for the next 50 or 60 or 70 years. It takes effort, because these are two individuals who have two different opinions, two different mindsets, maybe different perspectives, to be sure, different emotions, different ways of approaching situations. It takes an effort. And if you aren't willing to put that effort in, you're not going to find that joy. You're not going to find that, all the benefits and that first love that you originally felt, without putting in the effort. And if they've grown away from that, they've got to recommit themselves to working at that marriage. Sometimes that's a matter of looking at themselves and reflecting upon, what can I do to strengthen the relationship? It's easy to look at the other individual and say, you need to stop doing that and stop doing that. That'll make me happy. That'll make me happy. But a lot of it has to be introspective as well. Sometimes that's spiritual counseling that they may need. Sometimes it may be professional counseling to work through some of those differences. And like the key word, I'll just reinforce, it may have to be worked at. And to just give up and to say, I'm not willing to work at it, I don't believe it's pleasing to the Lord. It takes an effort. And that effort may take a lifetime.
The whole idea of divorce, according to Jesus and description and definition, it's legal. He acknowledged the legality of it in the 5th chapter of Matthew, 31st, 32nd verse, but he criticized it. He criticized divorce because he said it facilitates adultery. And in so many words, he said it differently, but that's what it boiled down to. And he spoke again on the same subject in Matthew, the 19th chapter, and Mark, the 10th chapter, where he said that it only came about because of the hardness of men's hearts. And that, from the beginning, it wasn't that way. God's intent from the beginning was that two people would become one flesh in marriage, and that what God joins in marriage should not be broken apart. And, in the traditional wedding vows, you hear that said, kind of poetically, but that's where it comes from. That's what God's intent was.
See, I believe that the key phrase, which has already been said, which Jesus used, is hardness of heart. Okay, that hardness of heart is a big thing today, and quite frankly, I think hearts are getting harder as time goes by, because it's all about me. See, it's all about what I want, what makes me happy, and so forth. So it's there's not as much maybe willingness, and of course I'm speaking in generalities, but there's not as much willingness to compromise. There's not as much willingness to say, well, let me sacrifice some, or let me see what I can do to help my spouse to be happy, and so forth. All right, this is all the things that are ingredients to a happy marriage, right? But with a hardness of heart, where it's all about me, well, then you're not making me happy, so I need to move on. I can find somebody else who can make me happy, and sadly, I mean, I've seen many instances where people do exactly that, thinking, okay, I'm leaving my spouse, I'm going to go somewhere else, I'm going to be happy, and then they're just as unhappy as they were before, just maybe unhappy in different ways, because it's within you a lot of times that you carry that kind of a thought or a heart or whatever, that you're just looking for somebody else to make you happy, as opposed to saying, well, what can I do as a servant of God within a marriage? Now, again, that kind of question is, it has a lot to depend on what the individual circumstances are. So we certainly can't give one answer that suits everybody, right? If I may say what I just said, and somebody will say, well, no, you don't know my marriage, and this is it doesn't really apply to here, and that could well be true. But just in general, I mean, we want to seek out to not have the hardness of heart. I think of the scripture in Ephesians, right, which I use in most weddings that I do, right, but it's in chapter 5, where talks about the wife being subject to the husband, all right? And some people want to jump on that. Oh, okay, I'm the master, though the wife has to do what I say, right? Because that's what it says in those verses, right? Without reading any further, where it says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave His life for it." So that I've often explained that to say, well, you know what? As I speak to a woman, if your husband is somebody who loves you that much that he would give his life for you, that he would put you ahead of himself in all things, isn't that the kind of husband you would want? Wouldn't you be willing to look up to him and in essence be subject to him, because he's putting you first. He's considering your desires. He's going to talk to you and work things out such that it's beneficial to both of you. Wouldn't you love to have that kind of a husband to look up to? And again, some have a hard time with it because they hear the word being subject to your husband is it grates against people today. But like I said, if you have somebody who has your interest at heart at all times, that would be ideal. I mean, but quite frankly, I would love to be subject to somebody who was going to consider me in all things. And so I think that's really what Paul was getting at as he wrote to the Ephesians.
One observation, I guess, I made as I was thinking about what you were saying, particularly about how sometimes a conflict in a marriage could stem from an internal type of issue, some kind of hardness of heart or something that's not right within, that if you just say, well, I'm going to just leave the marriage and start again with someone new, then you're going to bring the same issue into the new marriage, instead of actually putting the work in, like was said, and growing through it, and then hopefully both of you can be better individually and as a unit.
I guess I'll just say one more thing, because it's just happened like last week. My wife and I were traveling home from California, and we were in the airport, and we were sitting at the counter getting breakfast, and the woman behind the counter started talking to us, and so she said, well, how long have you been married? And when we said 38 years, we're like, 38 years, I never hear anybody staying together that long anymore. Okay. And so it's almost the exception now. And so let's be the exception, if that's how it is. I mean, society is the way it is, but that's not how God intended. If it means we want to be the exception, then let's be the exception, and we can have that kind of a happy marriage that lasts for a lifetime.
One thing that I always try to bring up somewhere along the line whenever I'm doing premarital counseling is an observation that I ask the couple to make. And usually they've come together because, they in getting to know each other, they found joy in each other. Each one starts to think about how joyful it is, how pleasurable it is, how wonderful it is to be with this person. I want to do this for life. And without realizing it, as much as they do for each other, they enter into this relationship with the idea of what I am going to get from this relationship, and not so much about what I'm going to give to this relationship. And so usually when I point that out and ask them if there's any truth to that, usually they acknowledge it. And then we start talking about how important it is that, the fact that you're getting joy is because right now you're both tuned in to giving joy. And if you lose that desire, there will be consequences that cause you to drift apart, cause you to have less joy. And I think, like Brother Jerry just pointed out, is 30. My wife and I just celebrated 55 years. With you'll get there, Jerry. And many. I know Paul might just top me. I'm not sure, but we went on a little vacation for a few days, and I could say that both of us were focused on pleasing the other one. Whatever we're going to do, I want to do what you want to do, and she wanted to do what I wanted to do. And, that was kind of really nice. And I have to admit, on an everyday basis, it doesn't occur to me so much to make sure that I'm thinking that way. A lot of times I'll just, hey, let's, and I'll go, I don't want to do that. Well, there's probably a better way to say that. Just start with that, and so after 55 years, you learn, he's going to say, I don't want to do that. And then I'm going to take another approach. And in the end, we're going to do it. but I think the notion that a marriage is an agreement to give the other one joy for life, if you can go into it with that, it's a wonderful way to start and try to maintain.
We've been married actually 63 years. I know that's a lifetime. And when we were young, she was the love of my life, and she's still the love of my life. I want to please her, and she wants to please me, and we do play that game. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? And sometimes we get a little angry because nobody will make a decision. But there's different stages of marriage, and we're in the stage where we don't have to worry about as much as you do when you're younger. Because there's not the distractions and all of the problems with child rearing and careers and all of those things. So we can just say that God promised us that we would have joy if we were faithful. We've been faithful. And early on in our marriage, we decided that we would never say the word divorce. We would never say the word separation because it wasn't an option. And it really is not an option for God. It's the option that man chooses to go against what God has provided for us. And what Jerry said earlier in the scriptures is the favorite thing that I talk about when I'm doing marriage counseling. Is in Ephesians, it says, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church. Well, Christ died for the church. Are we willing to die for our wives? Are we willing to die for our will to make our wives happy, as Christ wants to make the church happy? And I believe throughout your marriage, if you have any kind of a problem in your marriage, this is my second favorite thing that I counsel with, hold each other in your arms and pray for each other out loud, audibly. Express your love, express your appreciation, express the joy that you've had. And no problem is too great to be overcome by that kind of love. If we would have our people do that, pray together, for each other, with each other, and understand that marriage is a process. It's God's design. And if we get through it, we have great joy for a lifetime, a literal lifetime. I thank God for that.
We've talked about a lot of times people may be inclined to want to end a marriage when really it would be worth working it out and putting an effort to endure. Could there be exceptions when a separation or divorce might be an appropriate course of action?
Jesus even said in those same chapters I cited earlier, Matthew 19, Mark 10, there are situations in which you could justify a divorce. And I want to preface this with, just because you could justify it doesn't mean you have to end that way. It's not It's not like there's something that gets done and say, okay, the marriage is over. But let's say one of the parties in a marriage decides to have an adulterous relationship with someone else and just betray the covenant that's between him and his wife or her and her husband. That could be justification. It doesn't have to be. It's possible that the person could see the error of their ways, ask forgiveness, and even in the grace of the love that they once had shared, try to restore the relationship. And we've seen that. And we've seen that people have been able to have a relationship where they probed whatever has caused this, and they've built a stronger relationship than they even had in the first place. And that can be the end of it. But yet, that is a justification. Or in the case of Paul wrote it. I mean, it wasn't coming from the words of Christ, but in his pragmatism of seeing how the church deals with reality, sometimes one party wants to be faithful to the Lord, and the other party wants a different style of life, and they abandon the marriage because of that. Well, he says in that case, the believer is not bound by the covenant because the other one has abandoned the marriage. So there's that abandonment, and we have understood that sometimes physical abuse is such, or even mental abuse, or behaviors that threaten the life and thriving. I don't want to be too generous with this, but because we all have to, like it's been said, we have to work at a marriage. But when the survival or the reasonable existence of a person is threatened by the behavior of a partner, there's room for discussion, and that's sometimes comes about that we just end up that way. But like has been said, sometimes we've been in counseling when one part, especially it's usually the man that pulls out Paul's writing to the Ephesians or Peter's writings, and he more or less says she won't submit. And you're sitting there as a minister saying, "Oh, I wonder why she doesn't want to submit." When we can't go into this with a demand for our rights. These are partners where we both are obligated and need to get to a position where, out of the love that we have, we desire to see the other partner have joy. And we're willing, as Christ was willing, has been said now 2 or 3 times, as Christ was willing, and it wasn't easy in some of the cases. We see that he finally, submitted to the will of God and said, "Not my will, Father, but thine be done." Submitted to the will of God for the sake of his beloved church. And when we have that attitude, if 2 people have that attitude towards each other, they will find a way to have a joyous marriage like our brothers have described. And I really enjoyed our 63-year veteran describing some of the tactics that they use to have a joyous marriage.
I believe, as a servant of God, even if it's, quote, a valid reason, I believe that it's nothing to be proud of, all right, to say that, my marriage was unsuccessful, and I had to go find somebody else. I think as servants of God, we want to do our best to be successful in the way God wants us to be. That He intended us to have a happy marriage. He gave us the ingredients. He gives us the instructions. He gives us the spirit, the heart to make it work. And so even if it's valid, let's learn from our mistakes and then do better the next time. But really, it's our goal to get it right the first time. And that's why we should approach it even that way when getting married, when getting engaged. Say, is this somebody who I could be with for life? What I liken it to at times is, when you get on an airplane, right, and you're intending fully to reach your destination, to reach the end of the journey, right? But at the beginning they do what? They tell you how to escape in case you don't get to the end, right? How to use the exits and how to use the slides and and all that. Okay, I'm not saying that's not valuable information, but to be perfectly honest, I don't pay attention, right? Because my intention is to get to the end of the journey, right? I don't need to know how to get off part way there because I'm intending to see it through to the end. right? So when people were asking Jesus, what's the right way to end a marriage, or what are the conditions, or how does it work, right? I almost feel like that's what he was thinking. Well, if you're looking for the escape route at this point, then you're not going into it with the right frame of mind. You would want to intend to see it through to the end, to get to the end of the journey. And then you don't have to worry about how do I get out partway through. And so I like to use that example that when we're starting out in the marriage, think of it, you're on the airplane, you're not going to jump out halfway there. You really want to see it through to the end.
And that aligns with Brother Paul's comment of, we're going to see this through, right? We're going to enter into it with that intention, and we're going to see it all the way through. We're not going to talk divorce. We're not going to talk separation. We're not going to talk parachutes. We're not going to talk about emergency exits. Our intent, just as Brother Jerry said, is to see it through to the end. And the key here is we have control over that. As that husband and wife have control over making it to the end. When you're in the airplane, to Brother Jerry's example, which is a wonderful one, you're just a passenger, and someone's flying the plane, and there's mechanical issues, and who knows why the plane might go down. But in this situation, in a marriage with the Lord, it's you and your spouse who have full control over the outcome. And just as Brother Paul said, we're going to see it through to the end. We're not going to talk about any emergency exits. Having that bond for life, that trust, that confidence, that support of one another, it's priceless.
Thank you, brothers, for sharing about what the scripture says about marriage and what you guys have experienced. For our listeners, we hope you'll tune in next time. If you have other questions that you might want to ask our apostles, leave a comment, and may God bless you.
Usually, when you say you want to go out to dinner tonight, yeah, where do you want to go? You pick it. Well, that whatever you pick is not going to be what you want. So, give me some hints. No. Anything you want is okay. So I'll suggest something. Just no, I'm not that. So